internally, I think when we're trying to gauge sentience, we're trying to like, I guess you're right. Never mind. I take back what I just said. You're right. Huh. I hadn't thought of it like that.
Wait, if you cloned yourself, you don't think the other being would be conscious? Is that what you said?
Well, in the same way that you're not conscious.
Well, I mean, I was under the assumption that I was, so I don't know what you mean by that.
Yeah, but there's a way in which you aren't. Kind of similar. Like, there's a way in which I'm not. From your perspective.
So you're not really asking if somebody's conscious. You're asking if somebody can perceive somebody else as conscious.
Hmm.
But the answer to that is always no, regardless if it's a clone or anything, right? Or am I missing something?
Yeah, I mean, somebody is just a thing that's like behaving in a way that seems to remind you of yourself. That's like basically what we think consciousness is in other people.
Huh. You think so? I tend to think when I think about consciousness in other people, like that's definitely, I guess, a big part of it, obviously. But I think if I'm being tasked with determining if something is conscious or sentient, I'm really looking for interaction and engagement that like seems to indicate some synthesis or new generative material. That's obviously very hard to delineate from AI. I know I've tried to explore different things. I think the boundary there is fuzzy, but I don't think it's necessarily looks as if it's having a similar experience. I just think that that's what it ends up like manifesting as externally, but like internally, I think when we're trying to gauge sentience, we're trying to like, I guess you're right. Never mind. I take back what I just said. You're right. Huh. I hadn't thought of it like that. Huh. I guess that is how we evaluate consciousness, huh? We just kind of mirror what we do, and if that aligns with what we do, then we call it conscious.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you just changed my mind on that.
Oh, cool. Nice.
What was the last thing you changed your mind on, position-wise?
Well, it depends on how big. Bigger things happen less frequently.
Yeah, let's say like a medium to large size one, because if it's like really small, you probably won't even be able to like know, because that changes all the time or whatever. And if it's like super big, then you'll have to like think too long. So like, how about like a medium position that you've had that you felt like you've walked back or changed over time?
Well, I used to think AI was not going to destroy the world, and now I think it is probably going to destroy the world. That's probably the biggest change recently. What about you?
I think the thing I've changed my mind on the most, or a big change, would be I feel like I changed my opinion on religion again. When I was a lot younger, in my like teen years, I was very much like a militant atheist, like one of the like cringy, like, whatever, like that was like the 2007, 2008 type like anti-religious secular thing, right? That's where I like developed a lot of like my debate and like rhetoric abilities, because I would just go around and argue against religious people like all day long as like a 15, 16-year-old kid. And but then my opinions changed to like really respect and have like admiration for religion. I view like spiritual experiences as like a form of like I view like religion as like a form of like human technology that allows us to access like the spiritual thing that we all have the capacity for, and I think is profoundly beneficial for us. But then I feel like now in the last 2 years, my opinion on religion has changed again, and now I think it's like open season on shitting and making fun of religious people. So I don't know. I feel like that's kind of walked back. Yeah, just because I feel like. Go ahead. Yeah.
Correlated at all with your like closeness to religious people?
Not exactly. I grew up in a very religious area, very conservative Midwest town of 99.9% Caucasian, so like I grew up in a super conservative area. But I think the main thing that's changed is that I used to feel like in 2017 or in 2007, 2008, 2009, when I was like dumping on religion, I was doing that sort of in reaction to how they were trying to like eliminate evolution from schools, and they were trying to basically claim like creationism has like a reasonable, rational argument that should be taught alongside evolution, which that's not a tenable position. So I'd argue that a lot back then. But then what's really changed for me in the last 2 years is like, I feel like in like, let's say like 2010s, like, yeah, religious people were doing crazy stuff. They're always doing crazy stuff. But I feel like generally, if it seemed like secularism had like balanced a little bit more. And I feel like now in the last like 2 years, really since the whole Trump thing and like the reaction of the post-Trump thing, I really feel like we're moving in this like theocratic like route, and that's always been there. That's always been in the the more conservative party, but I think like it's getting a lot more extreme, like where you have people like like believing that the Democrats are ontologically like actual satanic demons. That's always been around, but now it's like the level of extreme on that is increasing a lot, and so I think that's why it's important to. I've changed my position to now being a lot more openly hostile towards organized religion, just because I think there needs to be more of a secular voice that's like speaking out against like theocracy, basically.
True.
Does that make sense?
And it was the same basic principle behind why people are so tolerant of Islam.
True.
Yeah, that's the thing is like in like 2007, 2008 or whatever, I was like kind of edgy about Islam thing, right? And then like 2012, 2013, like I was like so like, oh, it's like Islamophobia, like don't say. And like obviously like Islamophobia is real, and like especially after like 9/11, it was really really quite bad, just because of like the situation and such. But I do feel like this idea of like Islamophobia has been like used as like sort of like a convenient like board reset to be like obfuscate very reasonable criticisms of Islamic policies in countries. Obviously there's not like a singular Islamic policy, but like the way that different cultures have implemented those policies. I also think that's true of I also think that's true of other. There was something else I had, but yeah. So that's kind of my thoughts on that. Oh, I also think that's true of like the whole like, for example, on Twitter, I criticized like the CCP, and I got like mobbed by like tankies and stuff. I don't know. I mean, my initial post was a bit inflammatory, so I get like why it was more of a controversial take. But I just feel like the same thing happens there, where it's like you can have totally reasonable criticism of like the CCP, and then like left it, or like, and then I feel like different individuals will like utilize the left's like knee-jerk reaction to like be so inclusive, to where it's like you can have a reasonable critique of like the Chinese Communist like party, and then someone will literally like, oh my god, you're just being xenophobic, you're being racist. Like, no, like I think you're being racist because you're literally equating like the Chinese government to like Chinese people, like it's insane. And I think that we do the same thing with like the Islam, or we do the same thing with different like religions or different groups, where it's like you can like totally have fair criticisms about this group without that being a thing. I also think that's true with like trans people, right? Like people are so quick to be like, oh, like that person's like transphobic. It's like, look, I think there are some reasonable like discussions to be had about the way that like trans people fit into society and like what that means. And I don't think that just entertaining those makes you like, evil. And I think that that's shows up everywhere.
One thing I'm kind of curious about is that when you were talking earlier about trans people being like real or something, sometimes people on my Twitter, like the conservatives, are very angry, and they're like, people are just doing it for attention. And like, I don't know, transsexuality, at least based on the survey that I did, which is quite large, I have like 10,000 trans people responded, trans women specifically, and even more trans men. But they seem to have like a very distinct sexuality or a sexual orientation. Like I could probably easily predict if somebody is transgender by looking at the things that turn them on. And this seems to be very hard to fake socially. Like people don't really get socially conditioned into being aroused by something. And to me, this seems like extremely hard evidence. Also, other things like trans people have much higher rates of autism and schizophrenia. Like it just seems there's like a different kind of brain structure that is correlating with these things. Anyway, so you must have a lot of experience.
It's disproportionate ADHD too. Sorry, what were you saying?
Yeah. I mean, disproportionate everything, honestly. Like everything is higher at higher rates than cis people.
Yeah. I mean, I tend to agree with you. I wouldn't necessarily say like it's just like sexuality based, but I do think, at least in my experience, I've worked with thousands of trans people at this point, and I mean, what I've come away with is that, like, first off, it doesn't seem like there's like a singular like experience. Of course, that wouldn't make any sense as a person. I think there's probably people in the trans community who transition for, they just kind of want to, and it's more of like a transhumanist thing, where it's more of like, I'm just choosing to do this. Whatever, I'm allowed to do that. Okay, fine. I think then there's individuals who transition because they have like a lot of dysphoria. I think there's individuals who transition out of kind of convenience. I don't know. I think there's just a lot of different functions. I think that, for example, we've seen in literature like people who were exposed to like different like DES in like the 70s, like the mothers who were exposed to that, like their children have like much higher rates of intersexuality and transgender identity. So I sort of feel like there is something there that's happening, or multiple things. I don't think it's one thing. And I think this is what probably bothers me the most about the discussion, is it's like conservatives like really want it to be just like, oh, this person's got mental, this person has like, trauma. You know what? There probably are people who have transitioned because of trauma. There probably are. I mean, it would be insane to think that there isn't at least one case of a person doing something for some reason, right? It just doesn't make any sense to like draw a hard line there. But I do tend to see kind of patterns. And what you're reporting, or what you're seeing there, I do tend to see as well. There's a lot of like trends and patterns. It's hard to say if that's necessarily because they're trans, or when you're trans, your life experience is specifically different. So you end up, that then your environment then cultivates different interests and cultivates different patterns of being and interacting.
One thing that's very frustrating that people make this mistake a lot is people make the mistake of conflating biological with present at birth. So people will be like, oh, well, is being trans biological? Like, are you born with it, or is it something that you get indoctrinated with or something too? And it's like, you could have like a kind of like a proclivity towards something, or a predisposition towards something that is eventually like environmentally like kind of happens at an early age. So you're not necessarily born with it, but it could still be like a combination of like environmental or even biological factors. But just because it's happening somewhere in development, it doesn't necessarily mean it's insidious either. Like, for instance, it could be the case that a gay guy is somebody that ends up like modeling off of the mother more than the father through no like weird horrible things. Maybe the child just spends more time with the mom or something, right? Like that could be the case. But conservatives always present it as like you're either born gay or somebody like brainwashed you into it, and there's like no kind of in between stages, which is a little bit annoying, I think.
Yeah,
strong agree. In general, I find that childhood seems to have very little impact on sexuality as an adult.
Do you really think so?
According to the questions I asked.
One of the things that kind of worries me that's really hard, I think we've talked about this before, Aella, but like it's the idea that when you go to tell your own story, it can be really hard to figure out why things are the way they are sometimes. I think unless you do a lot of like very, very, very specific diving with like third party corroboration on like somebody's life. So like, for instance, if somebody were to say like, oh, like, why is it that, for me, like, why is it that you grew up very independent? I might say, well, I think that's probably because I spent a lot of time away from my parents. Like, maybe that was the case, but maybe there's something like a lot more innocuous in my childhood. For instance, like your parents bought you toys that like rattled. Like maybe that's actually a thing that sets children off to being more independent, because other children run away from them when they hear the noise, right? But you would have like no fucking idea that that's what's causing it. So instead your brain naturally like tries to fill in the gaps with a whole bunch of other things. Like, oh, I played Japanese role-playing games and all the main characters are schizoids. That's why I'm independent. But maybe that's not an influence at all,
Right. I mean, like it's possible that like specific experiences are causing fetishes in a totally non-correlated way.
Yeah.
Like there's no predictivity. Like the rattle causes it for you, but not anyone else ever in the world. And all of these things just like never show up in a pattern.
Sure.
And to be fair, I did ask, I think, like 40 questions about childhood, and none of those correlated with things in adulthood. Generally speaking, some small exceptions. So it's possible that there's in fact something else that I did not ask about.
Could you give us some information on the sample size?
Excuse me?
What was the sample size on that one in particular? I'm just curious so I can...
550,000.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So it's possible that like there's something going on that I didn't catch, but like even if it is like more specific, even if it's like I would expect to see at least a little bit of it caught in one of the questions. Like maybe like the true thing is like it's the rattling that happens, and this is, we would expect to see like a really strong correlation with like a specific fetish. But like I would expect to see like a slightly smaller correlation. Like maybe rattles occurred in a house with like higher income, because people were more able to buy it, and so you would see like a higher, even if it's like a weaker one. Like you'd see weaker but a present one. I don't know. It's just you would expect to kind of see it like trickle down somewhere else in the data. And it's like a little surprising to me that like that doesn't seem to be the case mostly.
Do you feel any of the fetishes or kinks you have now you can trace back into your childhood? Did you have those same like sort of proclivities? Maybe not necessarily sexual, but...
Oh, one of them feels like Yeah. I mean, basically, no. Like, one of them, it's like some of my earliest memories are just being like disproportionately fascinated. And another of them, there was like one incident in my childhood that I always like kind of assumed was the thing that caused it. But like after doing my survey and not finding any correlation, so I expected them to, I sort of downgraded hypothesis. Like, I think I'm just like, I just think people like reverse engineer their narratives a whole lot. Like, if you're into something, then you sort of go back in time and find all of the circumstances where this happened in your childhood to be like, that must be where it started. Whereas, like, realistically, you would just like be much more aware of things that are more salient if you're already into them. So it's like easier to go back and form a narrative,
Oh yeah, this is like restating like what I'm saying. Like, people go back and say this caused me to do that, but it might not be the case at all, right?
Yeah, you just are more likely to notice that story.
Yeah. Yeah, this is really annoying around things that research kind of shows is probably like not true at all. So like, for instance, like a lot of people might grow up and be really successful and disciplined and like, oh, well, I think it's because my parents beat me. Like, that's definitely the thing that caused it. And it's like, if anything, that could have been actually an inhibiting effect or a hampering effect on your life. But like, for other reasons, you ended up enduring and doing well anyways. But then those types of people come out and they say like, well, this was good for me, It's one of the reasons why like this sounds really mean, but I really hate people that like give success stories and then other people try to like copy off of that, because there's probably a lot of really unique circumstances for why somebody becomes successful. But people think that if they just copy all of these like kind of superficial things that another person did, that's going to lead them down the path of success, when that person that is successful might be missing like everything,
Mm-hmm. I think I have to go. Okay. It's late.
Be careful, buddy.
It was nice talking to you guys.
Yeah, it was nice chatting with you and nice meeting you. I should probably get going too. I have some work I need to be doing right now that I'm procrastinating on.
Nice.